Both Sayre Bedinger and myself, we get into our running back free agency preview here this week on Locked On Broncos. Not to mention, you're going to get that preview all week long. But we're taking a look at the running back position. We look at Melvin Gordon's status. Should the Broncos bring him back? Should they not bring him back? And which other potential options on the free agency market could the Broncos take a look at if they do move on from Melvin Gordon? You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, and I'm joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked On Network and 9 News. Broncos country, once again, thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day when you wake up. You go to work, you work out, you make breakfast, you turn on Locked On Broncos, you can listen, have a cup of coffee. We appreciate you. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, not to mention on YouTube. You can watch us, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage all year long. Sayre, my friend, hey, it's great to see you here once again, getting into our free agency preview. We're going to take a look at the running back position today, my man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Hey, everybody's favorite topic, Cody, free agent running backs. I mean, if you go on Twitter, you start talking about free agent running backs, you're liable to get shut down these days from football fans in general, not just Broncos fans. But I personally love it. Hey, 2 years in a row, Cody, the Broncos have signed a free agent running back. So I'm just saying, people, it's not something to just completely ignore.
Mike Boone last year was the 2-year contract signee for the Broncos, obviously contributing well in training camp. Didn't get much time on the field in 2021. We'll talk about that maybe in the prospects later. But let's take a look at it, Sayre. I mean, starting things off, let's go back and let's review the position from last year, 2021, the Broncos. And, obviously the expectation, a second-round draft pick for Javonte Williams, who was electric coming out of North Carolina. And, man, he lived up to every bill of the hype. Because I remember when George Paton drafted him, there were so many people saying, oh, my gosh, why did the Broncos trade up and get rid of draft capital to move up for a running back? I'm like, this was one of the best running backs. In my opinion, he was the running back one of this year's NFL draft. You talk about the Najee Harrises, the Travis Etiennes. I had Javonte Williams as my RB1 coming into last year's class. And so for the Broncos to get him in round 2, I was like, man, this is fantastic. And obviously, Sayre, I think everybody in Broncos country, for the most part, they're like, okay, I'm glad that the Broncos and George Paton went and got Javonte. And obviously Melvin Gordon was returning into the fray as well. And so we're all thinking, hey, it's going to be a dynamic 1-2 punch. Now, at the beginning of the year, the Broncos' run offense kind of got off to a slow start because everybody was really playing them tight to stop the run outside of Melvin Gordon's big-time run that he had against the New York Giants in Week 1. The running game didn't come for the Broncos till probably like a little bit, several weeks after Week 1. So, your overall thoughts on the review of the season for these two guys?
Well, I think obviously in hindsight, anybody who was upset over the Javonte Williams selection based on process or based on principle or whatever, you just got to admit that you were dead wrong. I mean, the dude is one of the best backs in the league, in my opinion, and I think that's a little bit projecting, of course. But, man, he's already one of the best in terms of breaking tackles. He's already one of the best in terms of yardage after contact. I mean, he's got multiple angry run scepters, doesn't he, Cody? He's got for sure one of them. So, I mean, he was as advertised. I remember watching the North Carolina versus Miami game, and I remember saying, like, my gosh, I can't even believe that this guy is real. I mean, he was literally just running over people and throwing them out of bounds and doing crazy stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, too, I'm like, man, Javonte's my guy. Like, if we draft a running back, I loved Najee Harris. I completely forgot about Travis Etienne until you just said his name. But I love this. I love
people in Jacksonville get forgotten these days, man. Jacksonville's a rough place to be.
Yeah, we'll see if Doug Peterson can help him out. But I love the Javonte Williams pick, and I feel like the Broncos hit a home run with that one. Melvin Gordon, too. I mean, that was such a good signing, and I think people underrate it. At this point, like, the Broncos' offense has been so bad for the last 2 years that people seem to forget Melvin Gordon has really been one of the only consistent sources of good offense that the Broncos have had for the last 2 seasons. Yes, he's had a couple of very untimely fumbles, but at the same time, nobody on the team has more touchdowns than him. Nobody on the team has been more consistently good than him. In my opinion, Cody, I'm just throwing that out there over the last 2 years. So I think that there's definitely, you look back at this 1-2 punch. I feel like the Broncos have a good couple of backs, and I feel like maybe you try to keep that going.
And I think it's an interesting question to pose, right? And obviously, we're going to go into kind of our Tinder edition. Do you swipe left or swipe right on bringing these guys back? We'll obviously do that coming up here in just a little bit. But really, outside of Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams, they didn't really utilize anybody behind them. Now, we did have the one instance where they did utilize Mike Boone against the Kansas City Chiefs, and he looked fantastic in that one showing. But after that, Sayre, we hardly ever saw Mike Boone again after that. And I get, obviously for Melvin Gordon was returning from injury at that point. You want to go with your two main guys, but maybe the Broncos open things up. I mean, could we see three running backs? I mean, if we look at San Francisco, we've seen them utilize three running backs consistently, by committee approach, and they've had to get very creative with who they use, obviously due to injuries at the running back position. But, in Green Bay, you do have obviously Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Outside of that, you didn't really use a third guy. So I imagine that's probably not going to be the case here in Denver. So we'll kind of see how it goes. But Broncos country, there's, Melvin Gordon's a pending free agent here after the season, and both Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, and we want your feedback too. We're going to play a little bit of a game and ponder the pros and cons about bringing him back or letting him walk in free agency. You get that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about the sponsor. Today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. That's our good friends over there, BetOnline.net. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs right to the big game here this weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, and along with live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Sayre, continuing on with our running back free agency preview here for the Denver Broncos going into the 2022 season. Once again, Broncos country, thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. But now we got to take a look at the Broncos pending free agents here at running back. Now, they do have a running back that is an exclusive rights free agent, more than likely. Adrian Killins, remember him all the way back to training camp and preseason. His first game, he got hurt, unfortunately, and I think he went on IR for the entire season there. So I don't think he'll be back with the Broncos here. But the main focus is going to be on Melvin Gordon. And ladies and gentlemen, I think that Sayre and I have done a really good job kind of explaining our value of Melvin Gordon here in this Broncos offense. Now, right now, according to Spot Track, which is a fantastic tool and a resource, if you have any questions about contracts, if you have any questions about who's a free agent, who's restricted, who's unrestricted, Spot Track has you covered here. But right now, if the Broncos were to maybe look at bringing Melvin Gordon back on a one-year deal, which I think could be an offer that the team makes to him, one-year deal, his calculated market value, according to Spot Track, is $5.2 million on a one-year deal. Now, Broncos country, the question that I asked to you, would you make this offer to Melvin? Was that something that you would do? Sayre, I personally would, because I think that if you can get another good year of Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams, and Melvin wants to be back, I feel like I would make this deal. I think this is pretty good value for where he's at on a 1 year.
I feel like I would make that deal as well, Cody. Again, we've mentioned this before. You've said it. I've said it. It's not our money, so who really cares?
Exactly.
Of course, everybody wants to gripe about, well, that takes away $5 million in cap space that you could use elsewhere, yada, yada. But at the same time, if you're paying $5 million for 10, 12 touchdowns, I mean, what's wrong with that? Well worth it, in my opinion. So, plus, Melvin is somebody who I think that Broncos fans, he loves being part of this team. Like, he's out there talking about running through with number 33, and he's like, we're gonna run through him next year. And I'm like, dang, like if any other Broncos player was tweeting this, all Broncos country would be absolutely freaking out. Like, oh yeah, let's go, let's re-sign this guy. So I don't know if it's the fact that he was with the Chargers, or I don't know if it's the fact that he's a running back, or the fumbles, or whatever the case may be. But man, Melvin Gordon deserves some respect, and I think that would be a worthwhile price. I mean, $5 million in today's NFL for a player that could give you double-digit touchdowns, like, that's just good business, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and Melvin, when Melvin first came to Denver, Broncos country, and he's spot on too. He's like, Broncos country doesn't want me. Like, he said that last year, and it was kind of sad to hear a player say, like, hey, the fan base actually doesn't want him. I'm like, anybody that looks at his production and looks at what he can do and what he can offer, it'd be wild to think that the Broncos, you don't want him on this team, because he does make the Broncos better. Melvin Gordon makes the Broncos offense better, ladies and gentlemen. I'll stand firm by that decision. But a lot of the unpopularity comes from the time of Philip Lindsay, because he was the Colorado kid. He was the hometown favorite. We love Philip Lindsay, but it was this divide. And those two obviously didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but Melvin and Javonte are very close. Like, they are good friends off the field in real life. I mean, I think you want to keep that together here. But let's make the case for Melvin to come back in 2022. Sayre, I think we've already touched on a couple of key points. You get that value. He's up there with Alvin Kamara in the most touchdowns in the NFL since 2015, if I'm not mistaken, 2015 to 2018. And in terms of that, I mean, I think he's at 68 total touchdowns. Kamara's at 69. I mean, that right there, the value right there and how they're utilizing. Obviously, Kamara got paid a big time payday in New Orleans there, Sayre. I think that when you look at the value, yes, he has to improve on the fumbling thing, but that wasn't really as big of an issue as people are making it out to be. A couple of untimely fumbles. He had 3 this season. The last one, I'm not even going to put fully on him because he didn't even fully secure the handoff before he was blasted by Melvin Ingram on a missed block by Alberto. I mean, that's stuff you want to go back and you see. And look, I don't want to make excuses for players in regards to that nature, but I do think it's important to note that it's overhyped. Everything that you're seeing about fumbles, it's so overhyped, and I think it's tiring. Like, I get tired of seeing the same argument on Twitter. I think Melvin Gordon makes the Broncos better. That's my case for him staying outside of the production that we've seen from him in 2 seasons already. Not to mention what he can do in this offense. He and Javonte have a skill set to each other that complements each other's games. In my opinion, Sayre, I think perfectly. Now, I mean, let's make the case for the Broncos maybe to move on from Melvin in 2022. Let's take it to court.
Let's take it to court. So here's my thing. I do like Melvin Gordon. I think just as an individual case here, I would be for keeping him. But the case against keeping him is always obvious. Running backs are a dime a dozen, right? That's what everybody says every single year. And of course, it's harder to find good ones than it seems. I mean, you got to find the right guy. Those guys got to stay healthy. That's the simple truth of it. But this is a really good running back class, in my opinion, in the NFL draft. And so if I'm looking at this year's NFL draft class, most of my mock drafts that I've been putting together so far, Cody, I find myself really being drawn to take two running backs. There's a number of backs in this draft that I feel like, man, I would love to let's keep collecting them. And especially moving to this offense where, we're picking up some of what Green Bay's done, some of what San Francisco's done. I would love to see them draft 2 guys. Not only that, you're obviously playing a 17-game regular season. And as you mentioned the other day, there's potential, of that increasing to 18 games, or who knows how crazy Commissioner Goodell is going to get in terms of regular season games. So you have to have, at least in my opinion, at least 3 running backs that you could legitimately say, we could start this guy any time and it's going to be fine. Aaron Jones at one point was the 3rd or 4th back on the Packers depth chart. He was able to come up, but there's a reason why you take dart throws on guys like that late in the draft, or you take shots at players in the draft who, this guy's really good at breaking tackles, or this guy has really great explosiveness, or this guy's, really good at catching passes out of the backfield. This guy's good at pass protection. I think you take shots on those kind of guys in the draft at a fraction of the price. That's the major case against Melvin Gordon. You could get 2 guys in the draft for the next 4 years at less than half of what it would cost to bring back Melvin Gordon.
And I see this case being made a lot on Twitter, and I think that's a consensus amongst Broncos fans. They do want to take a shot, and they want to gamble a little bit on, the NFL draft with one of these running backs. And you never know. You could find another diamond in the rough, like you mentioned, like Aaron Jones. I always feel like, too, like when you have a brand new offense and you have to rely on rookies. Remember last time the Broncos relied on a rookie running back outside of Javonte Williams, but like in a premier role? It goes back to Devontae Booker originally. Remember his first ever carry in the NFL was a fumble against the Carolina Panthers. And so there is that. I think a lot of it depends, though. But, I do think the Broncos do have another, like I said, another capable back on the roster, and what we talk about with Mike Boone. I think Demaria Crockett is actually one of those under-the-radar guys. It could be that dart throw that's already on the roster, Sayre, and it depends on what the Broncos do in terms of the draft capital that they do have. As it stands right now, they currently have 9 picks in the 2022 NFL draft. Could that lead to more? Could that lead to less? A lot of moves will be contingent upon that. Well, Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. Both Sayre, Bedinger, myself, we're going to take a look at some other free agents from some other teams around the NFL, maybe make the case as to maybe if the Broncos need to inquire about several of these players. We get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the other sponsor. Today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. It's our good friends over there, rockauto.com. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local auto parts stores to stock all the parts that you need. And why should you have to endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts in their computer, choosing the only brand that their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers starters with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. You get to save time and money when you use rockauto.com today. Why choose to spend up to 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years of reliable service, and Rock Auto prices are always reliably low for every single customer. And ladies and gentlemen, you can check out all the amazing parts available for your car or truck today when you go to rockauto.com. Right, Lockdown Broncos in there. How did you hear about us box? So that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. All right, Sayre, as we get into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. Once again, Broncos country, thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Continuing on with our free agency preview, we look at the running back position on today's episode of the show here. Now let's take a look at some other impending free agents from some other teams. And Sayre, I think there's a multitude, right? And this is, let's operate under the assumption the Broncos let Melvin Gordon walk in free agency and he's not set to return. If you have to look at any of these running backs, there's some interesting names out there. And I think we have to think about it in mind. What type of running back skill set do they have that would complement a guy like Javonte Williams? People are like, hey, give Javonte 25, 30 carries a game. I don't want Javonte to have that many carries in a 17-game season. I think you have to have balance. That's not a safe and sustainable practice for the Broncos. You know, he's bulky and he runs through contact. That stuff adds up, especially once you get to like week 10. And all it takes is one bad shot to be on the shelf, essentially. So I don't want to put Javonte Williams in that threshold, but let's take a look at a name here. There's an AFC West division rival, and it's the Las Vegas Raiders. And this has been one guy that has hurt the Broncos in the past, but I was thinking Jayla Rashad is set to be a free agent here for them this season. They've had a heavy reliance, obviously, on Josh Jacobs. They brought over Kenyon Drake this past offseason, and he hurt the Broncos in that first matchup before unfortunately suffering a season-ending injury, I believe, in the second matchup against the Broncos or beforehand, unfortunately, there. But Jayla Rashad kind of got fizzled out of that rotation there in Las Vegas. I mean, he's a guy that can run in between the tackles, kind of has that speed dynamic, and also is a guy that's going to catch passes out of the backfield. Not to mention, he presents a little bit of a return dynamic that the Broncos might need to utilize. Your thoughts on Jayla Rashad, and then another name that we could look at?
I think that's a fun name. Obviously, he's had some big plays against the Broncos, so that's one of the primary things that I judge guys on is like, how have you done against the Broncos? Have you hurt the Broncos? Would it be fun to have you on our team? So Jayla Rashad is definitely a guy that, I mean, if you're looking at back-end type guys, I would be all for that. The next name on our list is Leonard Fournette, Cody, and I feel like Broncos country, I feel like you got to think long and hard about this name, and there's one primary reason why. Again, Nathaniel Hackett, who was on the Jaguars staff when they drafted Leonard Fournette with the 4th overall pick. I'm just saying, and he was a big piece of that offense, obviously, that made it to the AFC title game. So I think that's a name to look at. We know that Nathaniel Hackett has been beloved by players everywhere that he's gone, and Leonard Fournette got traded away from the Jacksonville Jaguars, not because of Nathaniel Hackett, and he may not have liked necessarily a guy like Doug Marrone or whatever the feud was. I don't even remember the feud that he was having in Jacksonville, but to me, Leonard Fournette is the type of guy that if you say, all right, hey, we're going to let Melvin go, he's the type of free agent running back that would excite me because I feel like on any given week, he could pop off for 175 rushing yards, or, he could catch 8 passes out of the backfield for you. Plus his size speed combination in the Shanahan type of offense just seems like a match made in football heaven. So I would love that, Cody. I would love to know your thoughts on that, and then some other names that you have too on the radar.
Well, his nickname is Lombardi Lenny. He's a Super Bowl running back now. And as you mentioned, too, now he got banged up a little bit towards the end of the regular season and missed that wild card round for the Buccaneers, was able to return and actually tied the game up 27-27 in the Bucs comeback against the Rams that unfortunately they couldn't finish there. I mean, I would like that from the standpoint he can offer you, this tough physical running in between the tackles, especially with the outside zone scheme. It's really going to be about the Broncos trying to stepping wide to try to seal the backside so you can get wide to the edge. I mean, kind of similar to what we see a little bit in Tampa Bay with how they like to run the ball. So I think that for a guy like Leonard Fournette, it makes sense to have a physical complementary with Javonte Williams. And look, you can sprinkle in like certain packages. Mike Boone can be a specialist. I mean, he could be what Deebo Samuel is, not necessarily as a receiver, but he could be the motion guy that actually does get the ball from time to time. Like I think Nathaniel Hackett, if he ever motions guys, I do think that he'll hand the ball off to them several times, not just as a decoy for no reason there. That's one name to keep an eye on, but maybe even like Arizona running back James Conner. Now, he didn't offer much, I think, to the Cardinals this year as a rusher, but in terms of overall touchdown efficiency as a receiver, I mean, Sayre screenplays, getting out to the flats. I mean, he was making guys miss, and his overall productivity came in the receiving game. But do you want to maybe limit yourself to that, though? I don't know if that would be the case that I would take here for the Broncos, but I think it was a name I wanted to throw out. We've got a few more names here, though, to kind of go over.
Yeah, absolutely. I think James Conner's an interesting name. Marlon Mack, the
Ooh,
free agent for the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, he's been a 1,000-yard runner before. I feel
yeah.
like if a team like the Broncos lets go of Melvin Gordon, he's going to be looking for an opportunity where he could get a pretty prominent role. And I would say, even as people are looking at this, like, you don't necessarily want to just think of these guys in terms of, hey, they're looking for a running back one role, because in the NFL, running back two is basically a running back one
Yeah.
role anymore. I mean, you're going to get your touches. So I feel like he would be if he's healthy, he would be a fascinating player to add to the mix. I kind of have thought about that over the last couple of years. Like, should you throw a late pick at the Colts and just see if you can get anything out of Marlon Mack? But I would be completely open to that option in free agency as well.
I think he'd be affordable too, because if I'm not mistaken, he's coming off of a very bad injury. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he tore his ACL or his Achilles, one of the two. I'll have to confirm. But for him, obviously, Jonathan Taylor is the workhorse there, and Naheem Hines is the number 2 there in Indianapolis. So Marlon Mack, due to injury, really accelerated the Colts process in trying to, add to that position, and they added value there. And unfortunately, it kind of pushed him out due to his injury, which is, nothing that's in his control. But maybe we always like reclamation projects, right? So if he can come to Denver by chance, I think that the Broncos could get him on a very good deal that's team friendly, but also it's more like, hey, he's got to prove it in order to get extended. Why not? Why not take a look at it? I mean, I think he adds value there. As you mentioned, he's a former 1,000-yard rusher. You can't ignore that enough, especially in a system that runs the ball the way the Indianapolis Colts do. Now, I'll go to a guy that's going to be playing in the Super Bowl here this weekend. Sony Michelle has been a nice little bit of a project in LA, coming over from the New England Patriots. And I was very surprised to see him kind of find that groove. But man, he and Cam Akers are such a dynamic duo. I'm not sure LA is going to want to part ways with Sony Michelle. However, if they want to bring back OBJ or Von Miller, which right now the talk is that they are looking to do that, I don't know if they're going to be able to bring back Sony Michelle. I honestly wouldn't be opposed to Michelle coming to Denver and being that other guy alongside Javonte Williams.
I wouldn't be either. I mean, you look at the success of the Los Angeles Rams as a team this year. It's really, really interesting when you compare, like, remember they had that little skid after they were, I can't remember if they were like 6-0 or 8-0 or what they were, but they had that little losing streak there. And then they inserted Sony Michelle into the top running back role, and they started winning games again. And I'm not saying that he was the reason, but there is a direct correlation between the fact that they started increasing his touches, increasing his carries, and then all of a sudden they started winning more games. And why is that? Well, because you bring balance to an offense when you have a running back that can create offense for you, and a guy that can stay out on the field for all 3 downs. And when he's healthy, Sony Michelle, I mean, remember his dominant playoff run a few years back with the New England Patriots? I mean, He looked like he was going to be the next big thing in the NFL. And of course, injuries and different reasons, aside from injuries, have contributed to the fact that he's now been traded for just a draft pick to the Rams. But hey, he's playing in the Super Bowl, and he's going to be a key part if they win that game. So I feel like that's an interesting name for sure. And he's younger. He's on the younger side. Yeah. So you talk about if you're signing a free agent running back, you would prefer, obviously, they be younger guys. You prefer they don't have 1,000 carries already to their ledger and things like that. So Sony Michelle is a guy like that I think you could take a little bit more seriously as a free agent acquisition if you let go of Melvin Gordon.
Well, and there's one more guy we'll touch on here. He plays in the NFC West as well. And look, if the Broncos make a run at Russell Wilson, could reunite him with a former teammate here in Rashad Penny, who really exploded on the scene this year for the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, they were dealing with a lot of injuries. Obviously, they lost their key guy to a neck injury, and Rashad Penny kind of got stepped into this role. And all of a sudden, he became one of the fantasy football's biggest players this year when we talk about volume, overall efficiency, and touchdown percentage, not to mention just out of the backfield as a receiver and as a rusher. He provided dynamic contributions to that offense, which look for Seattle this year. Man, they struggled, but man, he was a bright spot for them this season. I honestly wouldn't be opposed to Rashad Penny. However, I think a lot depends on what the Seattle Seahawks do. If they're headed towards a rebuild, they may not have him longer. He may not want to be part of a rebuild. So, I mean, he does have options, which gives him, I think, leverage in Seattle in case they do want to bring him back.
I like that option a lot. I remember being at the Senior Bowl. Rashad Penny was there, that 2018 draft class. I mean, I didn't expect him to go in the first round, but I remember, quite a few of us were talking about the Broncos picking him up. I think the 2018 draft was the Philip Lindsay year, if memory serves me correctly. So the Broncos were in the market for running backs that offseason. And I remember Rashad Penny being close to the top of my list and many others, and he obviously didn't get off to a hot start, but man, a running back like that who's healthy and just hitting his stride, that's the type of free agent pickup that I'm interested in. I'm not necessarily interested in free agent running backs that, hey, this guy's got 8 years of 1,000-yard production and he's on the backside of his career. And obviously people don't want those type of running backs because they have barely any tread left on the tires.
Yeah.
You want a guy like Rashad Penny who, he may have an injury history, but man, he showed off that explosiveness this past year. He showed that he can be a 3-down back. He showed that he could be productive. And now you're getting him he spent the first few years of his career either on the bench or injured. So there's a lot of tread left on those tires potentially. So that's a move that I would be very, very interested in.
Well, Broncos country, let us know your thoughts on which running backs in the free agency market if the Broncos move on from Melvin Gordon that you would be interested in. Drop it in the YouTube comment section down below or on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger. But ladies and gentlemen, that will wrap up today's episode of Locked On Broncos here on the Locked On NFL Network. Ladies and gentlemen, you get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast. You can watch us on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Well, Sayre Bedinger and myself, we're going to be back tomorrow as we preview quarterback in the free agency realm. We take a look at every option here for the Denver Broncos. Tomorrow's episode of the show.